Just a bit on the voice and Indigenous issues, with early voting now underway right around the country and the referendum polling day less than a fortnight away. Many on the no side have expressed their opposition to welcomes to country and suggested that voting no might be a way to reject those welcomes. Now, I reckon that's pretty sad and pretty silly, because even though sometimes these things are overdone at the wrong time or the wrong place, I think at the right time, most Aussies appreciate this inclusion of Indigenous culture into some events, including our big national occasions. Anyway, we showed you how former footy legend Sam Newman called on people to boo the welcome to country at the AFL finals. And I'm pleased to say that at both the AFL Grand Final on Saturday and the NRL season ender yesterday, there was no booing.
And why I'm Wurundjeri country, you're most welcome to the traditional lands and the waterways of the Wurundjeri people. So Wominjeka welcome, enjoy the day. Thank you.
To the Hawkesbury River, Nepean River and Hawkesbury River, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Just wonderful stuff, isn't it? That's Australia and Australians for you. Open, inclusive and welcoming. Even in the middle of a pretty horrible referendum debate, our national character shone through. Just terrific stuff. There, let's bring in our panel now. Joining me on the desk here in the city of Adelaide is Mix FM breakfast host Ali Clarke. Good to see you, Ali, in the flesh for a change.
Yes, you're
brilliant.
real.
I'm real, not a hologram. And joining us also from Darwin is Katie Wolfe, Mix Mornings host in the great city of Darwin. Great to talk to you again, Katie. Give us your thoughts first up on those welcome to country. Big events, 100,000 people at the MCG, 80,000 or whatever at Homebush. People are into it. It's a unifying thing, isn't it, that welcome to country?
Yeah, and it's also what makes us Australian, I think, Chris. If you go and watch Tonga play New Zealand, let's say in the Rugby League World Cup, they do their tribal dance towards each other, or their war dance, whatever you want to call it. But it's incredible, and I think that it is our culture, and I love the fact that Australians embraced it. I love the cheer that both of those welcome to countries got at the NRL and the AFL, and it is what makes us Australian. And I actually think we should embrace it. I agree that sometimes the welcome to countries, when they're sort of done as kind of a ticking the box kind of scenario, like you might see at some events that you go to, they're not, sometimes I think to myself, some of these are a bit overdone. But when you're talking about those football finals, when you're talking about major events and you're talking about, what we saw over the course of the weekend, I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, couple of cracking games of footy too. We'll talk about that a bit later on. But Ali, you're the one I'm envious of. You were at the MCG. You were there for that great game of footy. But what did you make of that welcome to country and how the crowd embraced it?
It was interesting. It was the first time my 11-year-old boy ever went to something as big as the grand final. And when that happened, I wondered whether or not anyone would boo, and you could have heard a pin drop. It was incredible. It was beautiful. And when we saw the vision that you actually just showed then of Charlie Cameron, holding his face down into his jumper, I just would have loved to have known what he was thinking during that moment. And then to have a proud Indigenous man get up and win the Norm Smith medal. I mean, you cannot deny that in this sphere, certainly the Indigenous people should be acknowledged and we should be welcomed. And everybody turned in our section and said, up yours, Sam Newman.
Yes, up yours, Sam Newman, because the point is, when you're talking about crowds of that size and you listen to the polls, obviously half of the people there would have been intending to vote no. So I know a lot of viewers that contact me, they're angry that I'm a yes supporter, but to you at home who are intending to vote no, I mean, that's a credit to everyone. It's all Australians. We have different views on the referendum, yet everybody embraced that moment.
It's funny, on the way in, there was a group promoting the yes vote, and they were singing and everything else and handing out badges. Some people were yelling back at them and really showing that, no, they didn't agree with the yes vote, but I wouldn't have heard them saying anything or making a single noise during that welcome to country.
Yeah, great stuff. Makes you feel doubly proud to be Australian. A little follow-up on that, I think we can cue this up, is Nathan Cleary, who was the Penrith Panthers star, the guy who, by all accounts, basically won that grand final for them yesterday. I haven't seen it yet, but I do read the papers and you'll know what I'm talking about. The guy is an absolute gun. And he's come out today as a supporter for yes in the referendum. Have a look.
No voice, no choice. Come on, Australia, vote yes.
A pretty pithy message there, Katie. Now, I don't know about celebrities and sports stars, you know, about the impact of them in this debate, but good on him for standing by his convictions and getting out there today just when he's perhaps, I mean, he's always famous, but today's perhaps one of his one of the biggest days of his life, where he's basking in all that premiership glory as the man who delivered it for his team.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? The NRL is such a multicultural code. It is like the AFL, like so many of our wonderful sports. We have got so many incredible Australian sports stars. But when you look at our Indigenous sports stars, I reckon he'd be, you know, standing side by side and thinking to himself, well, I feel proud to stand next to the Indigenous boys that are in my club, and I want to actually support them as well. And I want to make sure that I'm, you know, getting my voice out there and wearing my heart on my sleeve, which I'm a bit the same. I'm always kind of cautious when you look at sports stars or celebrities taking a political stance. But I also admire it sometimes when you put yourself out there, you're prepared to say what you think and stand by your views.
Yep, absolutely. I support them, whatever their views are, putting it out there. I just don't think people should expect others to follow, but be out there and stand up for your convictions. If someone wants to take a lead, well, they should. Let's get on to the political aspect of this, though. And Anthony Albanese has been out there talking about misinformation and disinformation. Here's the Prime Minister.
There's a whole lot of disinformation out there. When Australians focus on what it is, it may give advice on matters affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Pretty clear. And the third is how it will function. And that, of course, will be subject to the Parliament. And that's important because this doesn't change the way that we're governed.
Anthony Albanese there talking about disinformation and talking about what the referendum is really about. Now, Ali, I agree with him. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we can talk about that. I could talk about The Voice for an hour, as you know. But the point is, I don't think it's wise for the Prime Minister to complain about that. His job is to counter that and make his own arguments. As soon as you start complaining about the media or the disinformation, you start to look too defensive.
Well, and the first thing that I want to respond is, we'll go, whose fault is it?
Yeah.
And if you had done a better job right at the start of this, then perhaps there wouldn't have been so much of this to happen and that steam gather and all the rock, you know, my sayings.
Yeah. Well, the point is, a lot of the main criticism of Anthony Albanese, and I certainly concur with that, is he hasn't put enough information out there into the public arena. So how do you complain about disinformation when you haven't put out enough real information?
That's right. And in the gap of real information and in the gap of confusion, people will go to what they know, which I think is what we're seeing a lot with the no vote at this stage, because you don't want to change if there's not a clear thing to change there for you.
Yeah, it is a worry. I said a year ago that the idea of not putting a lot of detail out there around what sort of a voice they'd want to legislate, Katie, would be a problem for the Yes campaign, and here we are 2 weeks out. It's too late to put that detail out there. But I do think he's right when it comes to the misinformation. And to me, the biggest misinformation in this whole debate is the main no claim, and that is that a voice is racially divisive, and it's a racist thing. I've just heard Andrew Bolt going on about that for the past hour. I think that is just essentially so untrue and so wrong to characterise something that is about bringing Indigenous Australians and the rest of Australia together to try and to help close the gap and to allow Indigenous people to have actually a say on those matters directly affecting them. To describe that as racially divisive, I think is completely erroneous, and that's been the foundation of the opposition argument.
Yeah, look, I don't think that The Voice is going to be racially divisive, and I really hope that that if The Voice gets up, what it actually does is bridges that gap that we've got. I think that we've all spoken about this on so many different occasions and why we do or don't believe in it. But what the Prime Minister is essentially asking Australians to do right now is to trust him. And Australians by nature, whether we like it or not, don't really trust our politicians. And so when you don't get that information that you're sort of after, you, like Ali said, you sort of go with what you know. And they failed to sort of fill that void. And I think if they can't explain to Australians exactly how it's going to work and how it's going to benefit Aboriginal people on the ground in places like the Northern Territory, they're going to struggle to get people to vote yes in a couple of weeks' time, or if they rock up early. I mean, the polls opened in the Territory today. But I agree with you, Chris. I don't buy the argument that The Voice is going to be racially divisive. But my concern at the moment is that there's a huge lack of information that's not being filled. And unless the Prime Minister can actually explain to Australians how it's going to work and do it in a way that's really sort of simple to understand and can get that point across and do it really quickly, he's got a couple of weeks and that last-ditched effort. But I just don't know how he's going to go.
Yeah, pretty half. Like a Nathan Cleary-like effort, I think, in the last 20 minutes of the referendum. Look, the number one issue in the country, we all agree what the number one issue in the country is, and that is the cost of living. I think if the referendum goes down, you'll see the Prime Minister and everybody else switch to that instantly. The focus there will be dramatic. But Ali, we've got these new figures out, new research today showing us that people's credit card debt is going up. Their savings are going down. What a horrible situation where people are basically having to put stuff on the credit card because they can't pay their power bills and their grocery bills.
I mean, and that is absolutely no surprise. They don't have a choice. I had to leave my bag with my little fellow when we went away for the weekend, and I said, listen, if anyone wants to take my bag, let them, because all there is debt and bills in there. That's the space it seems to be at. But if you don't have a choice, all you're going to do is be able to do that, and you'll get yourself into more and more and more trouble.
Yeah, and Katie, how are you seeing it in Darwin, the cost of living? I think the real worry at the moment, right, is petrol prices are so high, they're affecting everyone, but they're driving up the cost of everything else. So while that hurts everyone more, that's actually going to try and encourage the Reserve Bank to put up interest rates again.
Yeah, and then take that a step further and imagine what it's like to transport, your fruit and veggies and things like that to the Northern Territory if they're not grown locally. And the cost then when you go to pay for your groceries for a normal family, you go and buy 5 things and it costs you $60. It is a huge impost for the real, like we know that a lot of lower income earners have been struggling for some time, but I think the thing that we're starting to see now is that middle income earners or those middle class are really starting to struggle. And like you said, things like your petrol, things like groceries, things like your rent or your mortgage, they are all having a massive impact for middle Australia. And I just don't know what it's going to mean for people if they're not able to hang on to their homes, if they're not able to pay their home loans and things like that. What's it then going to mean in terms of some of the other issues that we're having with homelessness and people not being able to find affordable accommodation?